Hello everyone, this is Jake from Fife Paranormal. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite paranormal subjects and locations to investigate, and that is local legends. When I first got started in the paranormal field, the very first thing I was very fascinated by was, local legends. Stories that would either pass around school, or some people you would overhear them talking about the shadow man that walks down the old road, or the phantom figure in the cemetery. It's that kind of stuff that really piqued my interest when I first got into the paranormal field. And so a lot of locations I investigated early on had local legends attached to them. One of the areas that's a local legend that I investigate that still has kind of a special place in my heart was I investigated. It was more of on top of a mountain in southern West Virginia, but the story went there was a man who was a coal miner, and he was walking down the road. I think it was in the 19 teens or 20s. I can't remember exactly when, but he got hit and killed by a car on the side of the road that had swerved off. And they say still to this day, if you go up there in the evening time or around midnight, you can see him walking with his lantern down the road by the cemetery. And the cemetery has a very weird energy because it's literally on top of not really like a mountain, but a gigantic ridge. And it's surrounded by woods on all sides except for where the road goes and on both ways. And part of the cemetery actually dips down at almost a 90-degree angle. It's kind of weird how they set up the cemetery, but anyway, I investigated the cemetery a few years back, and while I was there, you kind of felt like there was, every time you would turn your shoulder, there was going to be someone there. Like every time I turned around to look at something, or I was looking at my spirit box and I'd look up, I would fully expect to see someone or something in front of me, behind me, really anywhere. It literally felt like you were in a sea of people that you couldn't see. And actually, as soon as the way we got up to the cemetery was we used an ATV, and as soon as we got off the ATV, I pulled out the spirit box, speaker, our All-Tech speaker, and voice recorder. That was the only three pieces of equipment that I used during my time there. And as soon as I got the voice recorder out, I turned it on, hit record, said the date and time, location, who was there, that kind of stuff. And within about 20 seconds of that, I recorded an EVP of what sounds like an older woman's voice. And it's really hard still to this day to tell what she said, but she had kind of a scratchy voice. It wasn't really a whisper tone. It sounded like she was keeping her voice low a little bit. That, or she was a little further off, not close to the microphone. Now this was, of course, an EVP because none of us heard it in real time. So, into the cemetery. The cemetery is pretty old. Dates back to the late 1840s is when the first graves were there. Last time I checked, there were over 900 known graves there. Now, I stress the known part because it's said that there are at least 100 to 200 unknown graves there, and a lot of them are soldiers from various wars, all the way up from the Civil War, all the way up until I think Vietnam is where it actually ends. Some people are still buried at that cemetery sometimes. There is actually, next to the cemetery, it's tucked away in a corner a little bit, is a church. And the last time I checked, the church was not in use anymore. But when I last went there, it looked like it was still in use. But, no one was up there. It's a really creepy, weird area, the way everything's laid out. Believe it or not, that is not the only haunted location on that part of the ridge. On the entire ridge itself, there are 3 cemeteries, and each one, I have investigated all 3 of them. The one I'm describing now is the most active cemetery. So, I'll play a spirit box session, and I start to go along, not really getting anything the first 2 or 3 minutes, and then after that, I start getting a lot of voices coming through. Now, when I started the spirit box session, I let it run 2 or 3 scans just to see, okay, are there any radio stations? If so, at what interval do the radio stations start and end? And so you kind of get in this idea in your head, okay, at this specific point in time, radio stations will come up. So it's just different mental notes like that I like to make on investigations. But I was noticing there were no radio stations coming through at all. And it was weird, being on top of a ridge, a sunny day. But I don't know. It happens sometimes where the station just won't come through, especially since we were pretty far away from the closest radio station. So doing the session, and we start picking up EVPs of different voices. Now, it sounds like they're far off, but they're not way in the distance. They're probably about 20 yards away, maybe 20 to 30 yards away from the voice recorder. That's about how it sounds. They're not shouting, they're not screaming, they're talking in a normal tone, like I'm talking now. And it's weird because at that time we were still picking up spirit box voices. It wasn't like the spirits were only coming through EVP or only coming through spirit box. They were coming through both. And there was at one point, I've actually shared this clip a few times here on the Fife Paranormal pages, where it sounds almost like something barking. I know in the files I've called it woof woof because that's honestly what it sounds like it says. The very first time I heard it, which was that night when I was going through evidence review, it sent chills down my spine. It disturbed me just a little bit because there's a human element to the voice. And at the end of this clip, at the end of this video actually, I will have the clip attached so you can hear it and judge for yourselves. But I still to this day have no explanation as for what it could be. Usually anytime something comes up, whether it be a dog in the distance barking, a car going by, I'll always make a note. Like truck going by, okay, it's gone now. That's the kind of notes I make, but I didn't make any notes this time around, so I don't know. There is also a tree at the edge of the cemetery, and it said that they used to hang people in the late 1800s there, like cattle thieves, horse thieves, different things like that. Just local legends, local stories. I never did see the shadow lantern figure walking down the road. I did see a few shadow people from time to time. One time head on, I turned and looking back towards the ATV at this other part of the cemetery, which was on a slightly elevated ground. It looked like a person just standing there. They weren't necessarily a shadow like an all-dark figure. It looked like just a normal person. So that was definitely an interesting experience. And investigations like that just kind of reiterates for me how cool local legends are. Because you never know when the local legend of the lady in white that walks down the road around midnight looking for her lost lover. You may investigate something like that, and it may be the most active location you've ever investigated. You never know, and that's why it's so cool, that mystery. And also you have a lot of local history that's tied into these stories, a lot of local legends. There's just so much that's, I guess, wrapped up in usually little areas. And now, of course, you have the bigger locations like St. Albans, Sanatorium, Exchange Hotel. Those are really cool to do. I love doing the big name locations. I love doing cemeteries, just really anywhere. And of course, sometimes I'll do a spirit box session at home just to kind of see what's around, who's around. But for me, I guess my favorite type of haunt to investigate is local legends, simply because you never know what's going to happen. Now, when you're investigating a local legend, it's very important to remember the whole legend part. And this goes with really any paranormal investigation. You don't want to go there with this fixed idea of, okay, this is the only thing I can experience, nothing else is possible to happen, so I'm going to create this tunnel vision that the lady in white haunts here. Well, I can only see the lady in white. No other spirits will or can make their presence known. Or you may be a skeptic that goes there and says, I don't believe this, nothing's going to happen. We're going to do a session and nothing will happen. And then guess what? nothing's going to happen. Because you can't have, I guess, a closed mind. And a closed mind doesn't just mean that you don't believe paranormal activity happens. It means that you close your mind to other possibilities. And in my mind, I guess how it works, you can go to a location and believe in the paranormal, believe certain parts of, I guess, the local hauntings exist, but you aren't open to the possibility of something new, something different, something that hasn't been reported there will happen. And local legends, it is good training ground also for not just new investigators, new equipment, but also yourself. I think it is good. I know a lot of people, they like to say, well, doing local legends, local cemeteries, it's dialing it back a bit. But for me, personally, I never dial back on any location, any haunt. And I don't believe there's such a thing as a lesser haunt. Because it goes back to, like I said earlier, you never know what location is going to be active, what location's not. You may go to St. Albans Sanatorium one night and nothing happens for 8 hours. And then you will go to a haunted cemetery that's haunted by the headless shadow figure, and you may get 20 EVPs, 50 spirit box responses. You may see the headless figure itself. You just never know. So, what are your thoughts on local legends? Have you ever investigated a local legend? And if so, tell us about it in the comments below. I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoy this video, and have a great day, everyone.